Hello, builders of good. Thank you for tuning in to the Build Good Fundraising podcast. Fundraising isn't easy, but it should be simple. So on this show, we take the mystery out of raising money. Now, on every episode, we coach you to build your fundraising like a flywheel. The flywheel has 5 steps. Number 1 is listening to donors. Number 2 is engaging them one-on-one as much as possible. Number 3 is asking the right people for the right things. Number 4 is celebrating every gift. And number 5 is reporting back in a real-time and responsive way. If you master the 5 parts of the flywheel, your fundraising flywheel will start to spin reliably with less effort on your part. Your revenue will grow, and so will your career as a fundraiser. Now, every week, we focus on one part of the flywheel. And today, we are focusing on asking. We're specifically focusing on asking generous, kind donors to consider making a monthly gift, how you can do that effectively, why you might want to do it. So let's get right into it. Here's my conversation with David Raley. Hey, David. Good to have you on the podcast.
Good to be here.
You've been doing monthly giving for the better part of 20 years now. You run Imago Consulting, which is a fundraising and marketing innovation agency. And these days, you're also about to come out with a book on monthly giving. You're in the process of finishing it up. So you're the right person to have this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's the I can't quite say the light is at the end of the tunnel as we record this, but there have been plenty of bright moments along the way.
We're going to focus on 8 steps to build a wildly successful monthly giving program. But before we do that, before we get into the highly tactical, I want you to help us paint a picture of where we're at with monthly giving. We've read about in the Bible, there was recurring giving to a certain degree. It's been around for a long time, but it seems like it's really having sort of a cultural moment in the last 5 years or so. Can you walk us through a little bit of how we got here and why monthly giving is all of a sudden on the forefront of everyone's mind in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, absolutely. Fun fact, by the way, monthly giving has indeed been around for thousands of years. This is not a new topic. I know a lot of people, at least in the North American context, tend to think of monthly giving as something that's, sort of maybe a child sponsorship or a missionary support type of topic. But the reality is it actually, the earliest roots of recurring giving were from the Jewish faith and the, giving of the first fruits of crops. And that was the really first monthly giving in recorded history. Let's fast forward about 12,000 years and talk about the more recent modern history of monthly giving. Really, Mike, there have been 3 kinds of monthly giving historically. I think our listeners, if you're with a charity, you can think about what category you fit in here. But the first is the category of what I call one-to-one, meaning the donor and the beneficiary are connected in some way, either directly because they know each other, as you might see in a faith-based organization that has missionary support, right. Or they might be connected sort of through the organization, like you might see in child sponsorship. But no matter how you are connected, the idea is that a donor is paired with one or in a quasi sort of relationship with a beneficiary. That has historically been the gold standard, for the last couple hundred years of recurring giving, because there's a human-to-human relationship. If I stop giving, I feel like so-and-so is not going to receive, right? And so that's right. Really, if you can do a one-to-one recurring giving program, good for you. But the problem, Mike, is that historically, the vast majority of nonprofits don't have the program or the infrastructure or the ability, for many reasons, to create a one-to-one program. So that's been off the table for the vast majority of nonprofits. The second category of recurring giving that has been around for, candidly, even longer in some ways than one-to-one is membership. And that is the donor is least a partial beneficiary of what the charity does. So think of your local zoo or museums, arts institutions, public television, public radio,
Yeah.
content organizations on the internet, right? Where donors give, but they also receive some sort of benefits in return. Typically, those are intangible benefits because they listen to the radio program or they read the book or whatever. But sometimes the benefits are actually physical goods or services, program services that donors who will donate also actually essentially are in some ways purchasing, right? So that's the second category. But Mike, there's a problem, and that is that the vast majority of nonprofits don't have the type of infrastructure or program to create this membership type of a model for monthly or recurring giving, which has left, once again, many, many nonprofits by the wayside. And by the way, my estimate is those first two categories are about 25% of nonprofits could probably create either a one-to-one program
Yeah.
or a membership program. The third category historically has been literally everybody else. Like you're just like, good luck,
Uh-huh.
creating a recurring giving program. I remember actually the very first program I worked on, and it was 20 years ago this month. That was with a local rescue mission, homeless shelter social services organization in the Los Angeles area. It's called Union Rescue Mission, and I just remember one working really hard on this program and
Mhm.
stuffing letters and printing out labels and all this kind of stuff and dealing with the check writing process of like 30, 60, 90-day lapsed letters and all that stuff. But I also remember it just being vaguely frustrating because it was such a small part of the organization's income. And so I'm very familiar just intimately as well as just personally with with that third category.
Yeah.
But, and this is the good news, the third category has changed over the last 10 years with the rise of what pretty much everybody listening to this will be familiar with, and that is the subscription economy. That has changed things, and that has made it so that those 75% of nonprofits are now finding monthly and recurring giving more accessible, more available than ever before, candidly, in history. And I have, because I'm writing this book, I have studied the
Mhm.
history of recurring giving. And so this is a tremendous opportunity, particularly for nonprofits in the North American context where monthly giving has been slower to become a regular part of the giving paradigm. And it's, as you can tell, I'm pretty excited about it. That third category I now call benevolence. And if you study the roots of the word benevolence, it means for the love of people and for the good of humanity. And so whether or not that term sticks, I don't know, but it is that third category of
Yeah.
nonprofit that fit that.
And donors are more predisposed or used to or more open to that sort of giving where it's not one-to-one and it's not membership because of
Yeah.
the rise of things like Spotify, Netflix, Patreon, other
Hmm.
sort of
Big
subscription
thing.
things where they're paying to get some sort of intangible benefit.
Yep, absolutely. And we've seen this, I've my background is also in digital fundraising quite a bit, and I've seen now on multiple occasions over the course of time that I've been doing this work that there is some sort of consumer trend that essentially plows the ground and creates an opportunity for charities to take advantage of. In the olden days, Mike, 12 years ago, that would have been fundraising and social media. Like there was a day when clients would say to me, "Hey, there's this new Facebook platform. Like we should totally do fundraising there, right?" And,
Yeah.
and the answer for the first probably 5 years was like, no, actually, it's a good place to communicate and or to connect, maybe with your followers, your volunteers, but fundraising is not really a thing. Well, people started getting used to in their consumer behavior spending money related to their Facebook presence, and they comfortable with putting their credit card in.
Mhm.
Over time, they became conditioned to be okay with that. Well, then charities were able to start to take advantage. The big moment from my perspective, being doing a lot of digital fundraising at the time, was when the Haiti earthquake happened in 2010.
Hmm.
And overnight, the American Red Cross and Facebook partnered and raised $30 million in like 24 hours, which at that
Yeah.
time was unprecedented.
Right.
And that was really the tipping point, the cultural moment in which people were like, ah, like if I could maybe my philanthropic life, my generosity life, and my social media life and my consumer life might actually integrate here. And so we're
Right.
just seeing in my opinion, the same thing, just with subscriptions and recurring transactions.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud as you're talking here. There's this saying in tech, it comes from tech. We'll see how it maps over to fundraising. It might not. I'm gonna take a swing here, but there's this saying that like a first-time founder is like very obsessed with product and just making like a really good product people want to use. And then a second-time founder is obsessed with like distribution, which is like, how can I get this thing in front of as many people as possible? And that will make the product better because I'm going to get the feedback. And so, as you're talking about like the subscription economy, have you seen, I'm relating this to distribution. Have you seen large charities go to like a Netflix or Spotify and be like, kind of like the superstore checkout model, where it's like at the end, it's like, do you want to add an extra dollar for charity? Has anybody gone to a subscription service and partnered in a meaningful way where it's like, with your Spotify subscription, do you want to add a 50 cent every month to the Red Cross or something like that?
Yeah. It's so interesting. I've got a underdeveloped, I will say, chapter in the book on corporate connections and the opportunities of corporate relations. So by and by and large, I would say no on the recurring giving side. Mostly what happens with corporate giving is, the round up at checkout kind of moment, or the put your change here, kind of moment. It's really a single gift game right now. But to your point, and I have a part of the book that I talk about the future of sustainable giving. I think one of the elements of the future of sustainable giving will be more recognition of the ongoing value that a recurring giving program needs to provide. And then as brands, we already know brands are seeing the value of aligning with causes.
Hmm.
The idea that, think of it as the Amazon Prime for recurring giving, right? That my recurring gift also happens to come with a 5% discount to the local grocery store. That I expect we're going to start to see more and more in the coming years. But I
Yeah.
think that's one of those consumer trends that hasn't quite converged yet. Now,
Yeah.
by the way, if you're listening to this show and you are like, no, Dave and Mike, there's this thing that you're not thinking about. By the way, email me, draley@imago.consulting, or just email Mike and he'll forward it to me because I would love to know. That's a really good question, Mike.
Okay. Hey, we'll be back in 1 minute, but I wanted to tell you about today's sponsor, Build Good's Fundraising Academy. And I'm here with Caitlin. Caitlin runs the Fundraising Academy. What is the Fundraising Academy?
The Academy is a community of fundraisers who get it. They're in it, just like you are. And not only is it a community, it's our Build Good team helping your team get your fundraising flywheel spinning, just like we talk about on the podcast all the time.
What does that mean?
Well, we take everything we've learned from years of working with clients and we help you put that into practice with your own donors. Everything's online, so anytime you have a question, you can post it, and our team, as well as other amazing fundraisers, will answer it for you. Weekly, we have multiple calls where you can get feedback directly in real time on your campaigns. For example, you could bring an appeal you're working on and we'll help you make it stronger. And if you have a question about your fundraising, you can come every single week and we'll walk you through those questions and coach you to your best answers. If you want to learn more, you can go to www.buildgood.com/academy.
Well, let's get into 8 different steps to build a wildly successful monthly giving program. We've talked about monthly giving quite a bit on this podcast. We've had Charity Water on twice, talking about some of the programs they're running. I think our audience is well aware and understands the importance of monthly giving. So we'll get to the how. You've got 8 steps. One is identify your stage. Number 2 is understand where you are. Number 3 is go on your donor's journey. Number 4 is talk to donors. Number 5 is nail your value proposition. Number 6 is design and launch or relaunch your program. Number 7 is recruit everywhere. And number 8 is cultivate, upgrade, and retain. We'll go through these one by one, spend a little bit of time in each of them. We'll start with identify your stage. You basically say start by assessing where you are, and you identify 4 stages where you might be at: starter, basic, intermediate, and advanced. What is starter?
Starters, like we are just getting going. I mean, I at this point, I assume every organization has at least a checkbox on their website. So that's
Right.
pre-starter. There were times in my history where it was like, well, yeah, we need to actually enable monthly giving on the donation form. So I'm assuming you've already got it enabled, but that's probably about where you are. It's like we got a checkbox. That's starter.
Basic, which is you've got something in place beyond
Yeah, just
beyond
a
an ability
little
to
bit
make
more. It's
monthly.
like we're
Yeah.
putting some effort in. Maybe in January we do a mailer and we have a little label on our checkbox that says, please choose this one. Or
Yeah.
we might even have a named program. One of the things, Mike, I've noticed is a lot of charities have a named program. It's
Mhm.
Friends of the Charity program. And by the way, if your charity program's name is Friends, I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying often the name is about as far as it goes. So it's like, we called it something, but
Yeah.
that's about where the value proposition ends.
Okay. Intermediate is you're like regularly recruiting,
Yeah,
which is
regular
you're just
recruitment. Yeah,
putting
you
effort
might
into
have
getting people into that basic program.
yeah, you might have instead of just the one time a year thing, you might a couple times a year. You might on every newsletter we send, we include some sort of call to action, or we have an insert. So you're doing some things, and importantly, you're cultivating your recurring donors. So you're thinking
Yeah.
about, okay, what is the communication stream to them, or we're maybe sending fewer of our single gift asks, and we're sending more relational or engagement oriented pieces. You've got something in place for cultivating your recurring donors.
Yeah. And then advanced. This is are you leading with monthly giving here? Is this
That's
like a
like the tip of the advanced, like the top of the advanced. Not everybody with advanced, I would say, is like leading their sustainer first, which is, by the way, a Wave Report article that I have coming out soon. There's a whole sustainer first approach, which is really the top,
Mhm.
but not everybody does that. But it's just a very mature, some would argue, say advanced or sophisticated program where you're thinking about not just acquisition and cultivation, you're thinking about upgrade strategies, you're thinking about retention strategies, churn prevention strategies. I have about 10 things that I walk through in the book that if you were doing more or less something in each of those, you'd be in that advanced category. And I think, Mike, the important thing on this first step before we move on, the reason it's important to identify your stage, number one, is you need to just understand that there's a spectrum, and every organization is at a different place on that spectrum,
Mhm.
and that's not a judgment statement. That's just a reality statement. I have a favorite author that I really enjoy. His name's John Acuff, and I heard him say this quote once, and it's, "Don't compare your beginning to somebody else's middle." And by the way, it's great life advice.
Yeah.
um, because we're just so often looking at so and so over there, or such and such organization over there, and it's like, oh, we're never going to be where they are. Like that's just, like out of
Yeah.
our reach. But what you're doing is you're comparing yourself to somebody else's middle. And so I want organizations to recognize, hey, we're in the starter category. That's not a
Yeah.
bad thing. It's where we are.
You're comparing yourself to others, and unfortunately, you're often giving yourself license to not do the thing because you go, we'll never get to where they are.
So
And they're
why
a
even
$30
start? Yeah.
million organization, and we can't do that. If you're listening to this, just plug yourself into one of these stages: starter, basic, intermediate, and advanced. And as we go through these, think about where you are and how this might apply to you. Okay, the next few things we're going to do, these qualify under our flywheel framework as listen and engage. This is really about like looking at qualitative and quantitative data, looking at your data and talking to your donors and understanding their needs. So number 2 is understand where you are, and this is by running some simple metrics. What metrics, what data should we start with?
4 quick metrics. And it's really with the metaphor I don't know if I heard or I came up with. It's not new, but it's just really hard to hit the bullseye if you don't know where it is. And so measurement helps you understand, like, well, what is a bullseye? What are we measuring here? So I've
Yeah.
just got 4 to start out with, and it's very, very simple, but some very large percentage of organizations couldn't tell me this right off the bat. So look at these 4 metrics. Number one, total active sustainers in the last 12 months, meaning they have given a recurring gift in the last 12 months. Number two, total revenue from sustainers. That includes single gifts, by the way. One of the beauties of a recurring giving program is that your recurring donors are almost always your best single gift donors. We find that for every dollar that is raised in recurring giving, 25 cents comes in from those same donors via single gifts. So if you bring in $100,000 every year in recurring gifts, those same donors should be, if you have a good cultivation program, giving you $25,000. Third metric is just take that total revenue from sustainers and just divide it by your total revenue from your organization, and that gives you your percentage of total revenue from sustainers. And then the fourth metric, which is the most important and also the least well understood, is the long-term value of your sustainers. And I recommend specifically over 60 months, which means you need to have 5 years of data. But that is the best capture of the real value you get from somebody who's going to give month in, month out.
Yeah. So those are easy metrics to run that almost anyone can pull, no matter what CRM you have, no matter what stage of growth you're at. Then you're going to go on your donor's journey. This is putting yourself in your donor's shoes. Is this just like trying to make a monthly gift to your org and see what it's like?
It is. And it's just, if you are working for your org and doing this, my only caution is, one, you might just consider having somebody outside do that, because there's just so many little nuances that you don't even catch because you just know better. You're like, well, I know that checkbox is there for that reason. When you have somebody like me or you, Mike, go through that process, it's like, that makes no sense whatsoever. Like, why are you making me create an account in order to start to give a gift or whatever the issue is? But it's literally, I mean, secret donor, secret shopper, whatever you want to call it. When we do this for clients, literally every time we have an engagement, we do a secret shopper study of their recurring giving program. We just go through the experience, we document the onboarding journey, we call in and cancel, we do all the things we can to just kind of get a sense of what a donor is going to experience.
Yeah. Yeah. The calling in and canceling, that's a good call. Try to, as part of this, don't just try to make a monthly gift. Also see what it's like. What happens if you try to cancel a gift? What does that feel like on the donor's end? Number 4 is talking to donors. So we always say the data can tell you what the data is. It can't tell you why the data is. Only conversations can do that. So this is actually booking an interview or a Zoom call or a coffee with a few of your current monthly donors and asking them about their experience.
Yep. When I say talk to donors, some people think I mean that euphemistically, like, like have a social media profile and respond to comments, I'm like, no, like actually talk to them, like have a conversation, whether it's at an event and you're sitting down around a table or you're able to do a Zoom call, but like a real synchronous one-to-one or one-to-few, preferably one-to-one, candidly, conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So we've identified where we are, and let's say we're sort of in the middle somewhere. We've got some sort of monthly giving program, but we're not really doing all that much with it. We looked at our metrics. We looked at how many monthly givers we have. We've looked at how much revenue we've gotten from them cumulatively, not just from their monthly gift. We've looked at the percentage of our revenue from monthly giving. Let's say it's like 5% of our revenue comes from monthly giving. And then we've also calculated if they all stick with us over the next 60 months, what is the value of a monthly donor and of our current monthly donor file. We've done that. We've made a monthly gift to our org. We tried to cancel it. We've seen what it's like to be a donor. And then we've talked to a few donors. We've had some conversations. We've asked them about what their experience has been like being a monthly donor. Now it's time to nail your value proposition. I have a feeling that you're going to say this is kind of where a good program either thrives or dies.
Something to that effect. Maybe the nail in the headline gave that away. But no, the value proposition for your recurring giving program is paramount. It candidly always is in any form of fundraising. A lot of people conflate offer with value proposition, by the way. Offer is a part of your value proposition. That's for X dollars, I can do Y. But your value proposition not only needs to be very strong, but it needs to be different than the value proposition for the rest of your fundraising program. So in the world that I inhabit, Mike, and I'm curious as to your experience in this, the vast majority of fundraising I interact with is what I would call single gift fundraising. So it's like all designed and wired to get one more $25 or $2,500 check or online gift, more likely these days. And that mindset is very scientific, and I've done a lot of it over the years, but it is a different thing than a recurring gift. Just like, and we'll use some subscription examples here, the subscription world is not just buying the same widget just 12 times. So just a quick example would be music streaming. If you would have told me, Mike, 10 years ago, hey, Dave, you know what you should do? You should pay the music company every month, and then they'll give you access to all the music and you can listen to it whenever you want. And if you would have said that to me 10 years ago, I would have been like, no, thanks. Like, I have my music library that I've built over
Yeah.
years, and, some
I
of
want
you
to
are
own
listening.
it. You mean
Yeah,
it's
like
not mine?
I
Like,
don't want to rent music. Like if
yeah.
you would have said rent music, I would have like, forget that. I'm not going to do that. And then what? If I stop paying, I'm not going to have my music anymore, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I document this in a wave report, and it's currently in the book. But the experience of going from, wait a second, like Pandora was my first experience with streaming music, and to go
Same.
through the joy, like the delight of having Pandora introduce me to a song or a musician I had never heard of before was like it's still mind blowing. Literally, like this week, I found a song and I sent it to my daughters because I was like, this is incredible. And so there's a lot more than just, in the case of music, renting music. It's delightful experiences, it's engagement, it is access anytime, anywhere, via any device. I can do it. I can play it in my car. I can play it.
Yeah.
My kids can play on their iPad. They can play it on the Alexa laptop, everywhere, right? But there's a holistic, ongoing value proposition. And for charities, let's talk about charities. The question is, why would you give to this organization, not just a gift, but why should you give on an ongoing basis? And why should you continue to give on an ongoing basis?
Yeah.
Child sponsorship kind of has it built in, right? Because like, well, that kid is still alive. They're still under
Yeah.
program. They need my support.
Right.
But for those organizations that aren't in that space, what does that look like for you? What is the reason why somebody would give to you on a month in, month out basis? And we go into that at pretty great length
Yeah.
in the book.
I want to camp out for one more minute and on the difference between a value proposition and an offer. Because oftentimes monthly giving programs don't have an offer. It's a vague support us every month to give hope, something like that. So the offer is important, but the value proposition, you said, is a larger part of the offer. The offer is part of the value proposition. Can you delineate a little bit more for us? What is a good value proposition? And then how does the offer play into the value proposition?
Okay. You said something that made me realize there's some listeners that are probably thinking when I said offer, I meant price point, like, because I even said X dollars does Y.
Yeah.
And even the price point is different. And so let me nuance that first, and then we'll talk about the value proposition.
Yeah.
So we think of price point as like the ask is going to be $24 or $48 or whatever the number is we're going to ask donors for. In my experience, that is less important in recurring giving than it has ever been. So the idea that, $38, feeds a child and helps their community for a month, makes sense for child sponsorship, in the sense that there is this kind of, how much does it cost to do one of these, versus
Right.
2 of these versus 10 of these. But the vast majority of nonprofits that are not in that category that I see don't actually put a price point like this, by
This
giving
does that.
$40, you are a whatever champion, of the organization. And there's multiple reasons why that's a good thing. One of them, by the way, is because some people, to one person, $40 a month, to another person, $400 a month feels the same. Why would you tell the $400 a month donor that $40 a month makes a champion of the organization. Like, no, I would rather have the $400 a month, right?
Yeah.
So it's less about price point, and I do talk about anchoring, but we won't necessarily go down that rabbit trail. But well, I will say, since I brought it up, anchoring is you can actually anchor donors too low. You can set them up for like, well, I guess basically all of the people who are in this core group of recurring givers give less than $100 a month. So that's what
Yeah.
I'll do too, right? So you don't want to anchor. Okay.
And
So back to
you can
your
actually
earlier.
take a
Yeah.
donor who was giving maybe $500 cumulatively per year before in one-time gifts, and you can convert them to a monthly donor, and all of a sudden you've made them a $300 donor per year, because you've
Fair.
anchored too low, versus your.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On the other end of the spectrum, by the way, I have one nonprofit I talk about in the book, and my wife was at an event years and years ago, and they do a lot with human trafficking and social justice. And she was just moved. They had a survivor, and it was just like, we're in, and signed up for a monthly gift. I know this organization. You would know this organization. It's a great organization. But I would not have signed up for monthly giving outside of that really profound experience she had. I just looked it up yesterday. We've given over $2,600 to that nonprofit,
Mhm.
which I don't say that to brag. I say that because that was 8 years ago, and you do
Yeah.
the math. About $30 a month comes to $2,600. I've given more to that nonprofit than to some of the nonprofits that I really actually care even more deeply about in some ways, right? And so value proposition is really, okay, what is the thing that will justify that gift on an ongoing basis? That's one aspect to it. There is the offer, which is like, what does a dollar do? And that is helpful to articulate to organizations. So I do advocate that nonprofits do say, well, $10 does this, and $100 does this, and $2,500 does that. But what I don't necessarily recommend to everybody, to most organizations, is to then like pair that dollar amount with your, okay, well then therefore you should only give $10 a month. That's where I
Gotcha.
think the mistake can happen.
Yep. Okay. Next, we'll go into designing and launching or relaunching your program. So, you've learned all these things by talking to donors. You've nailed your value proposition. You've thought deeply about why might somebody make a monthly gift to our organization, and that's got to be a different reason than why might somebody make a one-time gift to our organization. There's got to be an actually value proposition for why it should be a monthly gift. So, now we're ready to like design this subscription-ready recurring giving program. Um, how do we design this? What do you mean, like literally like what it looks like, what it feels like, the name, or like the operational nuts and bolts?
Yes. Yes. Design is definitely a word I used on purpose. There is a design element, a branding element to that. And part of that is, what is the value proposition? What is the program even do? But also a clear identity. What is it called?
Yep.
I will unpack, and I do in my regular columns that I write for the Wave Report. What are the pros and cons of different naming conventions for organizations? We can do that in a later episode, but the clear identity, it is important from my experience to have some sort of identity for the program. It should be a part of your overall nonprofit's identity. It shouldn't be its own, like, is that another nonprofit? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's really helpful when you can refer to recurring donors and they know that you're referring to them, when you talk about it in communications, that it has an identity.
Yeah.
Benefits for being involved. Benefits can mean, discounts and, goods or services, but benefits can also be intangible, like access, for example. Dedicated website presence is actually underrated. It's like the most boring thing on the list, but it's like, oh, I couldn't find your recurring giving program. Well, we have one. Remember that checkbox? It's like, well, that's not
Yeah.
what I mean when I say dedicated website presence. A great onboarding experience, and then ongoing cultivation. So that's a podcast in and of itself. But the other piece of language that I use that I want to call out is the relaunch, because I want to acknowledge that I would say 90+% of nonprofits would say, well, we have a program. So what do you mean design a program? And it can be really helpful to think about it, whether or not you literally relaunch, quote unquote, from scratch. but to think about it as clean slate. If we were starting a recurring program today, what would that look like? Because so many nonprofits are their recurring giving program is just the detritus that has collected over the last, couple of decades, and that's what it is. And so it's just sort of evolved into what it is. And so for those organizations, which is many, I recommend like, okay, let's think our mental model is a relaunch here. Like this is a new thing. If we were starting from scratch, what would we do? And then of course we have to figure out how to get from here to there. And that is a process.
Yeah. I want to talk about identity just a little bit before we move on. There seems to be two standard naming conventions. There's more, but one of them is like you become something. So like one of our clients, you become a freedom partner when you become a monthly donor. Another one of our clients, we helped them create a program where the identity is a good neighbor, become a good neighbor. And then the other sort of naming convention seems to be you're joining some sort of community, like Charity Water, you're joining the Spring or the classroom or the neighborhood, something like that. Do you have a view on either of those? Is one more helpful than the other? Is this just like there's a few different frameworks, just choose one, commit to it, do it well?
So yeah, in the book I talk about two types, and so you're in the same ballpark. The language I use is descriptive and fanciful. So a descriptive name is something that essentially says what it is. So it's friends of nonprofit XYZ. It's like that's not the Spring, which is a metaphor for clean water and community and all those sorts of things, right? And so that would be what I would call descriptive. And then fanciful is it's either a metaphor or a foreign language or a number, which I don't necessarily recommend. And both neither of those are bad, but both of those have deep potential flaws. So I'll just give you one for each. So the potential flaw for descriptive is it's too generic. It's like that's why I kind of made the joke about friends of the nonprofit XYZ program, because then it's like, what? You're a friend? Like one, that's a little cliche. But two, it doesn't really give you a strong identity. Because like I'm a friend of that other nonprofit over there too, right? So that's one of the downsides for descriptive. One of the downsides for fanciful is it's too esoteric or too clever by half. So a lot of organizations will use like not a lot will, but I will see organizations that use like a number. It's the 2294 program. And it's like, well, that's because our core stat that drives our mission is somehow related to the number 2294. And it's like, no one understands that. Like, don't do that. And so they become these clever or really inside baseball, like insider language kind of that really motivates the people who are like in the organization, but no real like, outsider really would either get or be motivated by. So those are just a couple cautions, but yeah, it's really the two. I do recommend having an identity. I don't have a strong opinion. It depends on the organization of whether it should be fanciful or descriptive.
Yeah. Number 7 is recruit everywhere. We've got this program, we've got the value prop, we've relaunched it. Now we got to recruit. Recruit everywhere. Does that mean in your asks for one-time gifts, in your direct mail, in your emails, in your one-on-one conversations?
Everything should be fair game. There's two reasons I say recruit everywhere. Everything should be fair game. Nothing should be off limits. Now, yes, test. And, I'm from the School of Direct Marketing. Doesn't mean you just do everything without testing, for example. But a lot of times programs like this get constrained to, well, that in January we do that push. What do you mean you want to do something outside of January? It's like, this is a really valuable program 12 months of the year. And so that's one. The other reason I say that is because I want people to recognize that this is a holistic program, and it's not just constrained to a time of year or to a channel, but it's a mindset. And then you hinted at it, we talked a little bit earlier about the sustainer first mindset, which is really the kind of the progression, the final form, so to speak, of a sustainer first program. But it is really recruit everywhere.
Yeah. Then lastly, cultivate, upgrade, retain. Again, this could be a whole podcast. This is about once people are in the program.
Yeah. This system is really about just like, and this is something about, we just talked about single gift programs, which are usually in many organizations very mature. they have all of these systems around what happens when somebody lapses and what happens, what is our ask strategy the next time we talk to them so that we can hopefully upgrade them. What is our, volunteer recruitment strategy out of this file? All those things. I just find that a lot of times the recurring giving program is underdeveloped in that area. It's like we got them over the threshold. They're a part of the organization now. Like, all right, donor services, let me know if they complain.
Right.
And it's like, whoa, there's a lot more. And I'll just pick on the one. Well, I'll pick on two. So upgrade. Many organizations don't ever ask their recurring donors to upgrade, which is such a lost opportunity. We
Yep.
just did oh, let's see if I can remember the numbers. I can't remember the revenue numbers, but I have a client just now that did a campaign that historically would have just been a recruitment campaign. But what we did was we versioned messages for existing donors and asked them to upgrade their recurring giving that were already recurring giving. So we had all the assets, did all the work. And what we did was we just did a slight shift of the messaging for people who are current monthly givers. Okay. And that those asks basically said, would you consider increasing your gift amount? They had 274 donors in 3 weeks say, sure. And I don't remember the revenue number, so I won't say it. But it was a significant additional revenue every month from people who are already giving every month. And so that's a huge loss opportunity. That's where you get into more of those advanced and intermediate, strategies. So upgrade and then retain. I've heard anywhere up to 25%. I've heard bigger numbers, but we'll just say 25% of donors of recurring donors that you lose on an annual basis because of what is known in the subscription world as involuntary churn, meaning payment decline,
Credit card expired. Yeah.
credit card expired mostly. And so thankfully there is technology that exists and many of the providers have it to auto update credit cards and to do churn prevention. And that's something that I do a lot with clients is,
Yep.
you're just losing people and they don't even know that they're quote unquote stopping giving, but they didn't intend to. They just, we live in a world where your credit card gets replaced.
Pay the extra 25 cents per transaction on Stripe for them to like when somebody changes their credit card for them to take care of that. It's and more giving platforms are getting better at that too. That makes a lot of sense. Oftentimes when people cancel, there's just no process in place to be like, even to ask in a gentle way what the reason is for canceling. And maybe we can lower the monthly gift. Maybe we can pause it for a few months. Just all these strategies to not just lose that donor and be like, okay, thanks for letting us know, and then never hearing from them again.
Yeah. It's not only sad, it's bad stewardship, sort of like sad and mad at the same time. It's like, we can do better.
Yeah. Well, this was great, Dave. Just to summarize what we've learned here. Number 1 is identify your stage. Number 2 is understand where you are. Number 3 is go on your donor's journey, actually make a monthly gift and cancel it. Number 4 is talk to donors one-on-one. 5, nail your value proposition. Why would somebody make a monthly gift to your org? Number 6 is relaunching or launching your program. Treat this as a second chance. You get a do-over here. Number 7 is recruit everywhere. Audit anytime you're asking for gifts. Could you make that a monthly gift ask? Could you have a segment that's a monthly gift ask? Could you include it? Number 8 is cultivate, upgrade, and retain. Once somebody becomes a monthly donor, don't just let that be it. That is just the start of their journey, not the end of it. Dave, if people want to know more, if they want to find you, if they want to get into the Imago verse and the David Raley verse, where can they find you?
Yeah, I think the best 2 spots, LinkedIn is a beautiful thing. And that's where I love to connect with folks. And I do publish quite a bit of thoughts like this. So LinkedIn, just look me up, Dave Raley. And then you can also go to our website. I mentioned a weekly column that I write called the Wave Report, which is about the coming waves that nonprofits leaders can pay attention to and leadership lessons on innovation that we can learn from. And that can be found at our website just at imago.consulting. And yes, it's not .com. And Imago is spelled IMAGO. So imago.consulting.
Well, thanks for taking the time today. I know you're on a big family adventure and you carved out a little bit of time to be here. I hope you can come back sometime. There's lots more to unpack here.
Yeah, man, this has been super fun. Thank you, by the way, just for your intentionality. I mean, the fact that you've got the framework that you all work with and you're able to connect the dots to other frameworks is just, it's a gift to the industry. So thank you.
Well, that's all for us today. Here is my short action plan for you. I've been furiously taking notes as Dave was speaking here. Here's what I think you should do. There's 8 steps, but I think the most helpful thing for you to do is to identify where you're at and then have a conversation with your team. Listen to this podcast together, map out the 8 steps. Start by identifying where you are, get a really clear-eyed look at, hey, if we're being honest, where are we at with our monthly giving program? Let's just audit this thing. And let's map out when somebody makes a gift, what happens after that? What happens if they cancel? Are we upgrading? Are we just map this thing out on a whiteboard? It doesn't have to be complicated, but just get a really clear-eyed view of where you are. And then pick 1 or 2 things that you can do in the year 2024 in the next 6 months. What's 1 or 2 things, like the single most important thing that you can do to improve that program? And then you can come back and you can keep doing it. As always, thank you for hanging out with us around the fundraising campfire. If you want to be alerted of future Build Good podcasts and resources, and sometimes we go live, just go to buildgood.com, sign up with your email anywhere. It all goes to the same place. That way you'll be in the Build Good verse as well. If you're listening to this, you're my kind of people. I'm your kind of people. Thank you for the work you do. I'm your host, Mike Dirksen, cheering you on as you build good in the world.